We come together this morning at a very sad time for our state and for our world. More than 10 million people around the world have been infected by the coronavirus, and over 500,000 people have died. Just yesterday in the United States, 50,000 people were notified that they had been infected, just yesterday. And here in our state, just the first 3 days of this week, 20,000 Californians were told that they have the COVID-19 virus. And 150 plus of our California family died this week, just so far. If you said to me that the legislation before us was going to affect those who were facing this terrible pandemic, I would be the first to say, I want to vote for that bill. You know, the governor's order on March 16th said that if you're 65 years or older, or you have an underlying medical condition, that you must shelter in place, period. That order remains in effect. The exception was that if you had to undertake an essential activity to get food or medicine. For us, as senators, that essential activity is being here on the floor at this moment in time, despite the risks to all of us, and not just those who represent that group of people that are vulnerable, but your families, anyone who you're living with. And so one of the key questions this morning for me is this bill an essential bill? Does this justify our presence here on the floor? It justifies that essential activity for us as senators. Now, during many floor debates here inside and also outside these chambers, we hear a desire to go after the titans on Wall Street, the biggest companies in the world and their profits. We need to create balance and fairness in our world. But members, does the bill before us today do that? Does it target those big, wealthy companies in our world that have taken advantage of their employees? And I think we all know the answer is no. It doesn't do that. This bill is targeted towards the small business owner, the small shopkeeper, the small restaurant owner. It's not targeted towards the big wealthy companies in our world. I have heard in some of the debate this morning a suggestion that this legislation and its economic impacts has been studied thoroughly, thoughtfully, in depth. And I would challenge that assertion. When have we ever experienced a pandemic that we're experiencing today? When have we ever experienced a time in which tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of businesses in California are closed at this moment with fears that they may never open again? In the quiet of this moment, I hear that shopkeeper at home crying, trying to figure out what are they going to do with the situation in which they find themselves in. All that hard work, all that savings, all the courage that it took to open up that shop. And now what are they going to do? And what is going to be the impact on their family, on their children? What are the choices that they may face? Losing health care, losing everything, all their dreams lost. And what of their workers, whether it's 5 or 15? What of their lives now affected? And what can we do about their circumstance? When they lose their job, there's no health care, there's nothing. There's no paycheck, there's nothing. So at the quiet of this moment, I think about that shopkeeper and their muffled cries in the back room because they don't want their family to know the sorrow that they're going through. And who are those shopkeepers? They're immigrants. They're refugees. They're people of color. They're people who maybe didn't even graduate from high school, but they've scrapped together the money to try to create an enterprise to try to make a better life for them and their families. So are we here on the Senate floor debating a measure that will house the homeless, feed the hungry, provide relief for those who have lost a job? Is that the essential work in which we've come together this morning to debate? And I think the answer is that does not match the legislation that's before us. I think one of the hardest jobs for a senator is when one gets a measure that comes from the biggest heart, a place of the greatest compassion, that we know has the best of intentions to make our world and make each of our lives better. When that legislation comes in front of us, and yet the circumstances or the budget just doesn't make that moment where you have to say, yes, I'd like to do that, but it's the hardest thing to say, no, not today, not right now. I'm going to leave it to others to talk about the private right of action in this legislation and the consequences that might make. I'm going to leave aside the issue of the fact that this is a budget trailer bill. It's a warping of the process, creates pressures on each of you that wouldn't be there if this was a normal piece of legislation that had gone through the process in the proper way. I know that this bill will pass today. I know that. I get it. But it shouldn't be the way that we do our best work in the circumstances in which we find ourselves, in the middle of a pandemic, with consequences that are still completely unimaginable. The proponents have a big heart. They're trying to do the right thing. In a different moment, it might be something that should be advanced, although I know it'll be advanced here today. But in this quiet moment, I do hear the crying of that shopkeeper. And I think this is not the time to put additional obligations on them without full study and review. And with that, I unfortunately will be casting a no vote.